Good afternoon and welcome to this, our first GBTA Europe Town Hall of 2022. I would like to wish you all, first of all, a very, very happy new year. And yes, I'm one of those people who keeps it going right until the end of January. Here's hoping that this is a really healthy, happy, prosperous, and most of all, normal year. So we've got an awful lot of content to get through today. Just to give you just to go over the agenda. First of all, I'll be introducing our new chair of the Europe Advisory Board, Ben Park. Then I'll be giving you a little bit of an update as to what's happening in GBTA Europe. And then we have the meat of the session, which is our GBTA 2022 BTI Global Outlook, which has been made possible by HRS. So we'll be having a look through the European lens on that one. So I'd like to now hand over to Ben Park, our new European chair. Ben, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. And hello, everybody. And I would like to take a few moments to talk a little bit about that. I'm not the only new person on the board. So I want to introduce a few new board members as well. You can see the faces already. And then I want to talk a little bit about the upcoming Berlin conference. So, but before I introduce these two very good people, I'm delighted to join myself in this new position as the chair of the European GBTA Advisory Board. And as I'm a buyer myself, and I joined the travel industry now 13 years ago from outside, no idea what GDS even stand for. I know how important knowledge sharing and building a network in the travel industry is. So that's why both VDR and GBTA have been hugely valuable to me. And I want to work with the European Advisory Board to build on this, where I know it has added value for me. Now going back to the two faces. So joining me as two additional newbies on the board are Roberta, who chairs the GBTA Italy Advisory Board. So molte grazie e benvenuto, Roberta. And on the right-hand side, we've got Stéphane, who has led the GBTA France for the last 4 years. Merci beaucoup et bienvenue, Stéphane. That's all I can do. I tried my best. So we all in the board want to build a board that represents the whole of the GBTA Europe membership base to help us to steer the association as we hopefully see a safe return to travel this year. So as I promised, I want to talk a little bit about the upcoming Berlin conference, as I can assume there are a few questions. So I hope you will all be able to join us at the GBTA conference in Berlin in partnership with VDR. As you can see from behind, Berlin is my hometown, and I look forward to welcoming as many of you as possible there. We have a great program planned, including thought leaders such as the sustainability guru, Mike Berners-Lee, the big idea session on agility as the new travel management, and brand new interactive think tank series looking at key topics such as sustainability, meetings management, navigating immigration, tax and social security laws, and mobility strategies for 2022. Looking a little bit at the venue, we at the GBTA and VDR teams are working hard with the Astral to provide a safe and secure environment in which to meet. I'll repeat that, a safe and secure environment in which to meet. All participants will be required to demonstrate their vaccination or recovered active status, as well as a proof of a negative antigen test. If an attendee has not received a booster shot, they will also be required to show a negative antigen test each day. We know this is not easy, but this will help us to meet in a safe and secure environment. All of this documentation will be checked by one of our very loyal partners, VisumPoint. In addition, in line with the Berlin Senate regulation, all attendees will wear throughout the conference an FFP2 mask. This is a Berlin Senate requirement. I hope that you will join us for what will be a great event. And if you want to see a little more of the city, we're also having a running tour on the morning of March 1st. So just go to the conference website to book and join quite a few of the advisory board members on the tour. Last but not least, before handing it back to Catherine, I want that GBTA in Europe serves all its members, and therefore any feedback, questions, suggestions you have, please send them to the email address which is shown here. We really want to ensure that we serve the members. And now with this and further updates, I'm happy to hand it back to Catherine.
Thank you very much, Ben, and welcome on board. So yes, as I said, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an update as to what is happening in Europe. So coming up, we have actually got our first in-person event on the 3rd of February. It's our GBTA France Carrefour des Experts, and it's actually a brand new format. It's highly interactive. We're having meet the buyer sessions and some knowledge sharing from our supplier participants. So I think that will be a really great event. Then in the 14th to 15th of February, we've got our travel risk management bootcamp. Now, this was a new course that we introduced last year in partnership with GSA. And it's a 2 half days. It's a virtual program that takes people through the new ISO 31030 standard. And so far, we've run this course 3 times. We've had 60 participants, and the feedback has been absolutely fantastic. So if you or a member of or somebody else within your organization is looking at travel risk management, I really strongly recommend you consider taking that course. Then we've got a GBTA Italy webinar coming up towards the end of February, which is on payments, virtual payments. I can't pretend that I understand Italian, but this is Fulvio has guaranteed me that this is what this is all about. And again, you know, we're this is going to be in the local language. So if you have any colleagues who are Italian who you think might benefit from it, or Italian members who are on the call, I really strongly recommend you consider that. And then finally, yes, we've got our conference happening in Berlin, and I'm absolutely thrilled that we're going to have this opportunity to meet face-to-face in 5 short weeks. And as Ben said, safety and security is our #1 priority. We're working really closely with the Astral to ensure that we create a very safe and secure environment. And we're also working to make sure that the program is of the highest standard, and there are lots of opportunities for knowledge sharing and interaction. And I was really pleased to hear from my colleagues in the sales team that we've had 4 contracts go out for new exhibitors. So there's a lot of interest in the event, and I really hope that you can join us there. Another big part of what we do in GBTA, and it's certainly something that I know many members value, is our advocacy program. And I think that has evolved hugely over the years. We've had an advocacy presence in Brussels since 2015, believe it or not. So we've been working hard to advocate on behalf of all of our members within our global advocacy program, and specifically in Europe. And I just wanted to share with you a really interesting slide that our team in Grayling shared with me and the rest of the guys earlier this week. And this is what is happening, what we're aware of in Europe this year. One of the biggest, we've got general milestones like the fact that the EU Council presidency, France has just taken over it. It'll be the Czech presidency later in the year. There are a number of meetings and forums that we're aware of that are coming up, such as the Council of the Aviation Summit, the Transport Ministers meeting, the Clean Aviation Forum, and so on. But one of the biggest pieces of legislation going through Brussels this year is around or consultations is around the Fit for 55 policies. And this is going to be the main piece of the main initiative which is setting the EU sustainability agenda. And we are tracking that really, really closely to make sure that we consult and that we input on behalf of the business travel industry, because we know that this is a major priority for our members, both buyer and supplier. And it's certainly an area where we want to take a very, very active role. So, but of course, we do have a number of pressing issues. Number one is getting back to travel. And so we are really working hard to make sure that we advocate on your behalf around that. Working hard to make sure that we input, as I say, the Fit for 55. And then, another pressing issue is that the Commission wants to use the restart of travel to revamp EU air services rules. And so we're looking at those as well. And we think that, as you can see, that there has been quite a political response to some of these pressing issues. The lack of coordination between member states around restrictions, the politicization of the climate, and then that there's a push for multimodality in terms of the transport and travel sectors. So our objectives for 2022 are, as I said, return to safe travel, to continue to advocate for that, return to sustainable travel, and calling for cost-efficient measures to support the decarbonisation of travel, and to complement what we are doing in terms of sustainability, the return to air travel, and then smart borders. So making sure that our GBTA members are, informed about the launch of ETIAS and related measures. And then very much linked to that, as you may have seen on the daily news brief, we have got a new team member, Delphine Milo is our new SVP for sustainability. And the reason why I say sort of a new team member is that Delphine has been working with GBTA for many years. She was part of the Graving team. She led that team. And so she is really, really aware of GBTA and our challenges and our strengths, and is also highly informed about sustainability. So I am delighted that Delphine is joining the team, and you will be hearing lots more for her because, as I've said, sustainability is such an important issue for us this year. So I say lots of information. You all will be receiving a recording of this webinar, or this town hall, so you can mull over it and take a look at those slides. But I'd like now to move on to the meat of today's programme, which is around the global BTI outlook. It's the view from Europe, and so I'd like to welcome Chris Ely, our Research Director at GBTA. Thank you, Chris.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. And good afternoon, everybody. And I'm excited to be here. My name is Chris Ely. I am the Research Director at GBTA. And I'm going to walk you through some of the key findings that we have found in our most recent BTI, our annual BTI that was released back in November at convention. And we're going to look at some high-level trends, and then we're going to drill down to look at it from more of a European perspective. So if we can just go ahead and get started here. First, I want to thank, again, Catherine mentioned it, but I also want to thank the sponsor of this year's BTI, which is HRS. So this would not be possible without their support. So thank you very much. And the next, we're going to move on to looking at more about just some high-level overviews of what is the BTI, just so everyone is aware. So this is the 13th year that we conducted the BTI, and it stands for Business Travel Index. And we're looking at all forms of spending, demand side measurements of all types of spending on business trips. And it incorporates a whole host of inputs, with including labor, materials, and other inputs as it relates to the T&E process. And it looks at sort of the travel industry sales and sector travel intensity. So the actual report you could look at, for example, well, what is the forecasted growth of the German auto manufacturers or auto manufacturing industry in Germany for business travel spend over a period of time. So we're looking at different industries. We look at things like productivity pricing, all sorts of policy issues and how that impacts the BTI. And we look at this in terms of 73 countries and 44 industries. So we have a lot of data. There is something called the data cube, which is not available to members directly for free, but it does sort of have, it has the sort of the master data going all the way back to 2000 when we first started this for different industries and countries. So that's just sort of a high level overview of the BTI. The report is available to all GBTA members. So let's move on. So let's think about where we're at. Now, keep in mind, like as I mentioned, that this was released in November, our most recent BTI, November of 2021. So we're still at that point in time, and we still are gathering more inputs to see how 2021 closed out. So that there is always a backlog in terms of data because we use so much data from government sources and other sources. It does take some time. So thinking about from that lens, everything when I talk about 2022 and even 2021 is a forecast because we're still waiting for, as I mentioned, the 2021 data, but then looking forward. But let's think about where we left off at 2020, right after. So 2019 was a stellar year for business travel spend across the world. It was reached $1.4 trillion in 2019. Then we had the pandemic hit first in 2020. And sales dropped, business travel spend dropped to $661 billion. So that's a record decline. We'll get into some percentages in a minute, but I broke out by here just looking at some of the regions here. So, North America in 2020, business travel spend was about $138 billion and accounted for about 21% of global travel spend. Europe, it was about $161 billion or 25%. Just to give it some context though, just to explain some of the scale, in Europe in 2019, instead of $164 billion in spend, it was $386 billion. So that's a 58% decline from the peak of 2019. North America, we see here in 2020 was 138 billion. Well, in 2019 it's 391 billion and accounted for 25% of all global travel spend. And so we broke it out by different regions, but you can see here just the magnitude of the impact of the pandemic and what it's done to the industry in 2021. So let's move ahead. And so just looking at some of the numbers, I mean, what does this mean? And so I mentioned again that this is and forgive me if this is a little busy chart, but I just wanted to show, how the drop and what the forecast looks like. So we have 2019, the high of $1.4 trillion, declining 54% in 2020 to 661 billion. But then we're forecasting growth, slow and steady, but we do not forecast or expect that global business travel spend will reach 2019's number of 1.4 trillion until 2024. But we are expecting growth every year going forward. So again, in looking at 2021, we're expecting it to clock in at 754 billion, then hitting the 1 trillion mark this year at approximately 1.0 trillion dollars, and then going on through the forecast period through 2025. So that's just this visual of just how far the industry was hit with the pandemic, but this is our growth forecast going forward. Okay, so let's look at let's think about some of the economic what's happening, economic reasons, and sort of looking at business travel spend and some of the key economic issues that are impacting it. So one of the first things we want to see is going forward is next. Thank you. Is what about the economy? What is this is the IMF's forecast for the global economy, and we see here that growth, the global economy in 2020 declined 3.1 percentage points. But we're expecting that they are expecting it to reach increase significantly to 5.9 percentage points in 2021, and then about 5 percentage points or 4.9% in 2022. So strong growth in the global economic GDP is forecasted. We broke it out here looking at advanced economies and emerging markets and developing economies. Again, but the theme is maybe there are differences in terms of the growth rates, but still growth in both types of regions of the world in both 2021 and 2022, which bodes well for the industry. So we can move. Okay, great. This is just slide I just wanted to share with you. This is just goes to show the relationship and how tightly related business travel is, or with other types of with the Purchasing Managers Index. So we see what we've overlapped here is manufacturing production and our output with services, business activities. Well, that's where it includes global business travel spend. And you see that they're very closely related. The direction is the same. But this also indicates, coming off the high of the low, of 2020, we see here that huge dip, that there's pent-up demand for business travel. So as industries continue to grow and expand and reopen, and production picks up, that will also help fuel the growth of business travel. But there is a direct correlation between some of the business travel and the overall economy and manufacturing index. So let's move. Great, thank you. But there's still some challenges, and to say the least, one of which we seem to hear almost every day in the news, are supply side challenges. Certainly the pandemic disrupted supply chains going all the way back to 2020, but we're still experiencing some problems with supply chain, getting those bottlenecks, or getting through those bottlenecks. I noted here that logistics companies were a little bit caught off guard by the demand surges. We had issues with lean inventories, but also labor shortages, and I'm going to speak to that in a minute. But certainly the limited supply of truck drivers, dock workers, due to quarantines and other labor shortages, has impacted supply chains. And so we see here on the right-hand side, overlapping sort of the EU and the United States, again, to show that the trends are similar, very similar. The regions were both hit very hard due to supply chain bottlenecks starting in 2020. Okay, super. Worker shortages. This is also a challenge in advanced economies as well. We're having worker shortages due to a host of reasons. There's demographics, more people are retiring, or retiring early in some cases. Many people are experiencing childcare constraints, which impacts their ability to go back to work. COVID, skills mismatch. So there's a host of issues impacting worker shortages, which will act as a headwind, we noted here, on business travel recovery. IMF expects output to recover in 2022, but that does not necessarily mean that they're not expecting the same for employment at the same rate. There's going to be a lot of pressure on suppliers, and we're going to see also, we expect some labor shortages that are going to further impact pricing as well. And so you see here on the right, we broke it out by advanced economies versus emerging economies, and just looking at the employment and output. So output, what we see here in both advanced economies and emerging markets, is expected to rebound, but employment and labor not at the same rate, which will impact pricing and also supply chain and distribution issues in many cases. Okay, and let's think about also just some of the industries. And what we've done here is looking, despite the impact of COVID, there still is also upward pressure on travel prices. And we broke out here looking at some of the key areas: lodging, restaurant dining, airfare, motor fuel or petrol, and oil. The spike in the price of oil does impact and is impacting a host of industries. And we see here the year-over-year change for crude oil, for example, over 100% increase in the price of crude oil, which is also impacts a host of other industries. Now, certainly, airlines do have largely, there's still a lot of capacity, but it's waiting for the demand to return. So in many countries, many people are still not flying, or there might still be a lot of travel restrictions, which impacts international travel. For example, just one example that comes to mind. I mean, early in the pandemic, it was very difficult, and it still is challenging in Australia to actually even leave Australia, but getting back in is not always easy. And we hear those stories also, the challenges of getting in or traveling in different countries. So there's capacity in the airlines, but the demand isn't quite always there yet, which is why we see some still declining in price pressures. But on the right-hand side, we can see, looking at some of these industries that we've flagged here, lodging, crude oil, motor, and how it's related to all these things. These industries are kind of related to the impact of the crude oil. So on the right-hand side, you see here the cost of oil in US dollars per barrel. And as it increases, certain types of impact, certain types of industries directionally also are feeling pricing pressures and demands based on the price of oil. It does impact it. Again, not looking at, but I flagged here, maybe not as high for airlines at this point, because of the cost of the capacity that exists. So let's see, moving on. So looking forward to some of the conditions that we think are going to be required for recovery. Certainly, vaccinations uptake and more in vaccinations certainly is necessary to help us fuel the recovery. But there are also many government policies and issues around what's coming out of national governments around travel and border entries. We also look at other issues around travel management and just the sentiment around business travelers themselves, and what that means. So I just broke out here. We're going to see this is from a CDC, I'm sorry, a global UN-based organization that looking at some of the biggest travel markets, what are their vaccination rates here? And you see in the darker green are those people that are reported, the percent of the population that is fully vaccinated against COVID. And then the lighter green are those who are partially vaccinated. But we see here pretty strong uptick, strong vaccination rates in many of our top travel markets. China at 88%, France at 79%, at least partially vaccinated. The next slide, we can see some of the other countries as well that are in our top list of business travel markets as well: Brazil, UK, United States, Germany, India, Russia. But we see here also relatively high vaccination rates, certainly with room to grow. Russia and India, Turkey, maybe a little less so. But there is still some room to grow across the board in terms of vaccination rate upticks in all of the key business markets. So it's high, it's strong in many markets, but it can still be a little bit stronger. That's one of the main key takeaways. But and again, business travel recovery, it does hinge on larger vaccination levels. And we see here, I put here below key countries in our that we look at, some of our key countries, top business markets, and then we're looking at the relationship between those who are fully vaccinated, that's the blue line, and then the business travel growth index of spend. And we see here that it does mirror, like, as more countries with lower vaccination rates, like India and Indonesia, how that impacts some of the growth, the economic growth, particularly like Indonesia is below the average of those of the average CAGR. So this is just a graph to show there is a direct relationship that we see between vaccination rates and business travel spend. Okay. And looking at some government policies, I mean, we're going to speak a little bit about this for a minute or two, but government policies are also key, particularly for international business travel. Maybe that's not much of a surprise, but we have here on the left-hand side, a table of some of the top business travel markets based on 2020 spending, and just the status, or at least the status that we when we produce the BTI. I know that this changes seemingly on a daily basis, but the restrictiveness, the level of restrictions certain key countries have to allow entry, and we can see here on the right just sort of like where where we are in terms of the recovery. In terms of, so we're seeing that, early on, some countries, some areas, there was more total closure in key regions of the world. Some regions are opening up slowly, but we're seeing that it is impact, or this does impact where we're at, and so there's still government restrictions are challenge to the resumption of many components of business travel, particularly international business travel. Catherine mentioned that as well in terms of GBTA's effort to resume the safe return of business travel. And we certainly spend a lot of time, GBTA, on both sides, across the world, lobbying and working with government officials to open up business travel safely. So in the next slide, we can see here, as many of you know, we have GBTA does a monthly poll, and I hope everyone does participate. We really do appreciate everyone's participation in it to track the sentiment, what's happening out there in the industry. And I thought this was interesting. This is from our most recent poll that we released just a week and a half ago or so. And we asked a question about what are the biggest barriers to the resumption of business travel. And we had some stats here, but if you want to, one thing I think is really interesting, or an interesting point, is look at government policies here. So in aggregate, 4 in 10 respondents across the globe said that its government policies is the greatest barrier. But let's take a look at just some of the if we look at some of the differences between some of the regions. North America, I broke out North America, Europe, the EU, and then UK separately, just to show some of the differences. So we advance a minute to next. We can see here that 6 in 10 respondents based in Europe and 2/3 of those based in the UK say that government policies are the biggest impediment to international resumption of international business travel. Compare that to what we saw among respondents based in North America, the US and Canada. Only 1/3 felt the same way. So there's a difference between the role of government in different areas and parts of the world that is impacting business travel. Conversely, when we look at company policies, the next thing is 1 in 4, about 24%, say that it's individual company policies that are restricting or impacting international resumption of business travel. But when we break it out by different regions, again, it's higher in North America than it is in Europe and the UK. So in those regions of the EU or Europe and the UK, it's more the perception, the feeling is that it's government policies, not necessarily company policies, as opposed to those in the United States and Canada. Okay. And if we want to, and then you can see here flagged, I mean, just to see some of the differences here, just to call it out. So if we move on to the next, let's just start with what is the, overall the BTI. So let's look at it from the perspective of Europe, first of all. Again, here I have, this is the global business travel, and we saw this earlier in that other chart, but just to show the forecast, again, we're not expecting to hit 2019's level of 1.4 trillion until 2024 on a global basis. But we are forecasting strong growth, particularly this year and next year as well. Certainly this is dependent. I flagged here this growth is dependent on a lot of factors, vaccine rollouts, any new variants, maybe if any changes around business traveler sentiment around safety, just shifts in behavior, and national policy or travel restrictions are certainly impact business travel spend. But based on what we know, or what we had in November, this is our forecast globally. But let's move on and look at Western Europe as a whole. I mean, we see here Western Europe is expected to take a little bit longer to recover. And so in 2021, we still estimate that there is a business travel spend will still decline, or will clock in as a decline compared to 2020, perhaps fueled a lot by government policy restrictions and border closures. But then we see forecast, strong growth going out through the rest of our forecast. And we forecast that in 2024, Europe will reach approximately where it was at in 2019 in terms of business travel spend. of about over 300 and around approximately $350 billion in 2019. So, and if we want to look at the other parts, here's Western Europe. Next slide, I believe we have Eastern Europe, emerging Europe. That's Eastern Europe and emerging Europe. Again, growth throughout the forecast period, but will take approximately until 2025 to reach what 2019's levels were in terms of global business travel spend. But I did provide here, you'll see here at the top, so the compound average growth, CAGR, we're expecting for Eastern Europe to be about 12.1% over the time period. So let's think about Western Europe. Spend a little bit more time just thinking about Europe, Western Europe. Again, like we flagged here, we're still expecting 2021 to clock in at a decline of almost 4%. You know, it's every market. Western Europe's share, Western Europe experienced one of the largest declines during the pandemic as a percentage, and its decline in terms of overall global share fell from about 23% of all business travel spend to about 20% in 2020. But we do expect sentiment. We do see that traveler sentiment is strong. There's optimism we see in our polling among European business travelers that they expect to be back to their regular levels of pre-pandemic business travel in the next year. That's their expectation. But we also see a lot of pent-up demand for business travel, and that's going to help. We forecast will help fuel growth in Western European markets in 2022, this year and next year, with the full recovery in 2024. So let's also spend a few minutes just looking at some particular countries, just their forecasts. So if we move to the first one, thinking about the UK. UK was hit harder, one of the harder markets in Western Europe. It decreased to 21 billion in 2020, and from 53 billion, which is a 60% decline. So we don't forecast the UK business travel spend to reach 2019's level until 2024, with coming in at $57 billion. We expect also here the CAGR of almost 19%, approximately 19% for the timeline. But again, 2021, we're expecting still some declines for a host of reasons, border restrictions being one of them. But there are certain industries, and I mentioned earlier in the introduction that the BTI does break things out and looks at things by some industries. So I just flagged out some of the industries, some of the more resilient industries in the UK: administrative and supports, arts, entertainment, mining, and professional services have been relatively resilient in the UK. And we expect other industries like wholesale trade, which experienced the largest decline, and financial insurance activities certainly dropped as well in 2020, which are key industries that are also pulling down or having an impact on overall business travel spend, given the decline in those large markets, those large sectors rather. Thinking about Germany here, we're expecting for Germany again having some more declines in 2021 of about 7%, but having an overall, but reaching its, having a CAGR of about 18%. So, but again, looking at this year forward through 2025, we're expecting strong growth in Germany. And some of the key areas that we see in Germany, some of the markets, Kevin, thank you. So it fell about 62% in 2020 to about $30 billion. That is greater than Western Europeans' overall share, average of about 59%. As it's flagged here, we expect continued decline in 2021, but some industries will be more impacted in Germany. And flagged here, we see, for example, accommodation and food services will be impacted the most, with a drop of 47%. However, the industry will sharply recover, as I flagged here. We expect at this point, for example, 2025, but German business travel spend will clock in at about $82 billion. So looking ahead to France, again, we see here that annual business travel spend in France, it fell to about 19 billion in 2019. It fell, that's from 43 billion. So that's a significant decline, but we expect France will recover in 2024 with about coming in at $44.8 billion. So it's going to take a couple of years to reach 2019 level. Certainly some of the key industries that were hit the hardest in France, we saw in terms of the wholesale trade was hit quite hard, but also some other industries, public administration, defense, also challenged. We do expect certain industries also, though, more to accommodate a little bit more quickly. Arts, entertainment, accommodation, food services expect to recover the most over the forecast period in France. Let's look at the Nordics. We see here that, and this is, we just grouped them all together, the Nordic countries, but we do see here that the Nordics were a little bit more resilient. But we are still expecting a decline of 1.3% in 2021. But business travel activity in certain areas did receive a lift, particularly some of the, what I called out Sweden, the travel currency, the currency exchange for the corona actually was a little bit beneficial for Sweden, as are higher oil prices in Norway, which helped impact some of the mitigate some of the declines. But we do expect that Nordic countries will reach $43 billion, which is on par with the 2019 spending levels, but again, it's a 2024 story. Okay. And Italy, we see here that again forecasted another decline in 2021 compared to 2020, but you know, it's down. It was down 63% from 2019 levels, so very sharp decline. But we do anticipate again that the growth story starting this year, moving forward with Italy reaching 38 billion and then 39 billion in 2025. And that will be once in 2024, if things of our forecast is correct, we anticipate that it will surpass pre-pandemic levels in 2024. And again, part of the challenge also in Italy is that large sectors of the economy was really shut down as Italy was hit hard early on by the pandemic. We expect, across the industry will recover with certain industries, including accommodation, finance, transportation, and warehousing, where we forecast will be the best or the strongest in terms of recovery, in terms of business travel spend in Italy, with a CAGR of almost 20%. And so just wrapping it up before we have some time for a few questions. So some key takeaways, again, business travel, they fell almost lockstep in 2020 across Western Europe. And with each market falling between 50 and 65% of their pre-pandemic levels in Western Europe. But the share of global travel spend fell because of that, from 23% of all global travel spend was based in Europe in 2019, fell to 20% in 2020. But we do expect some more decreases this year, which does make it this year being in 2020, make it one of the most impacted regions along with North America. And we also see that the Delta variant hit hard in Europe, but we do expect business travel or some growth in Europe, travel volumes, as we see more international restrictions are being lifted. We think that will bode well for the resumption of business travel spend. And I want to just hit home that pent-up demand for travel, it's there. Business travelers we see want to get back on the road. Companies want to get their travelers back on the road. Many companies want to get their travelers back on the road, help rebuild those balance sheets that were decimated or hit hard during the pandemic. But we do expect full recovery to pre-pandemic levels in Europe will reach 2024. That's generally directionally for across Western Europe. Some markets will maybe be a little bit quicker. We forecast maybe the UK, Italy, and Sweden will lead the way in terms of growth this year in 2022 forward, followed by growth growth trends for Germany, France, Norway, and Finland as well. And so the CAGR, that's the compound annual growth rate. That is, just so everybody knows, that's just the average growth rate from the anchor point. So from what you've seen on the charts, which is I have 2020 to 2025, that average growth rate for each country. But looking at the overall region, we expect it to be average growth over our time frame through 2025 to reach almost 18%. So to clock in at 17.6%. So with that, those are some key takeaways. We have some time for some questions. I will answer them the best I can. I think we have a Q&A box that people can ask some questions. So do we want to start with what's in the Q&A box, Catherine?
Yes, certainly. Absolutely. Kristen, as you say, there's the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And so if you type in questions there, Chris will endeavour to answer them for you. Now, the first question, it's a toughie. Chris, so it's, do we know what airline CO2 footprint was in 2019 globally? And I don't think that's something we've typically covered in the BTI.
No, we do not know. Now I did, yeah, we don't have that answer. I know it's available. I actually read a stat a couple months ago about what it was. I wish I could remember it. But unfortunately I don't know what it is, but we can see what we can find out and maybe get back with you on that.
So Carlos, we will get back to you with that statistic. But Ben, I think as a former economist, you had a few questions for Chris. So Chris, buckle up.
Okay.
No, but first of all, Chris, thank you so much. Brilliant presentation. And I think there has never been a time where this data is more looked at, because everybody's looking for any indicators when we see the hockey stick. So thank you very much. So I think one of the first question, which I'm assuming a lot of buyers having as well, or suppliers, is when we look at the spend recovery slide. I think it was the second slide you shared. And you're projecting after this 14% increase now, next year or this year, 2022, like almost a 40% jump in business travel spending. And I think there are two questions behind this. Is, do you assume that the increase of the almost 40% will be even across the sectors like air, lodging, blah, 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 or will we see large differences? So will some sectors contribute more than others from the increase? And the second question, as you always show so great, the correlation to other industry KPIs like oil price. So if we see or expect the 40% jump, what are the factors everybody should look out for to see if that jump is really happening?
Sure. I would say there, as I mentioned in the presentation, there's assumptions built into this, but the 40% we would look at, I don't think that, let me start by saying, we don't think that it's going to be even the growth across all industries. Some industries are going to grow more quickly than others, depending on their function. So for example, we expect certainly like manufacturing, and maybe transportation to grow potentially faster than some other industries, but it does vary by nation. I think that we see here that things to look for, again, it's very dependent on government, not only just government policies, but with the opening and loosening of restrictions, which is critical to opening or to resuming business travel. But then also which will also impact business the sentiment as well, and the willingness. But I think that we need to look at also things like again, monitor those supply chains. It seems like every day there's, for example, one key critical issue that seems to be percolating in terms of just economic, or is still the supply, the shortage of chips. And that will impact, that does already have a direct impact, for example, on the automotive industry, for example. And so again, we're seeing that I would encourage people just to monitor, look at what are some of the key what we're seeing actually in terms of the key bottlenecks, in terms of how are things working out in terms of supply chain, or is that improving, in terms of oil prices, et cetera. I think it's probably fair to assume also that might be some other factors which weren't really touched on. We didn't touch on too much in the BTI, but there are always certainly global political issues as well, which can impact as well, just national economies, which will impact business travel spend. But I think that directionally we're seeing that fueled by this pent-up demand, the desire, the need for companies to get their people back on the road to help generate sales and leads, et cetera, will help fuel or reach that 40% growth, or that's what's going to be driving a lot of it.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Sure.
So Stefan has asked, he said that the BAR have met in January and their forecast for business travel recovery is 75% of 2019 volumes by 2030, which isn't aligned with the BTI. So, what are your thoughts about why, there are different figures around. So what are your thoughts as to why there's a difference there?
Sure. I think that it's, I forget which famous economist, was it Friedman, who said that, forecast frequently and often. So I think there's certainly a lot of different forecasts out there. I think without knowing specifically about admittedly, I don't know, I've not seen the report you're referring to, which cites, it's going to take until 2030. But I think that not knowing then the methodology that they used and whatnot, the BTI, the GBTA BTI really is comprehensive business travel spend. It's everything, including is airfare, air, ground, hotel, but also other meals, incidentals. It's all spending on a business during a business trip, so to speak. And so I don't know if that accounts for it, but I think that again, our forecast is based on more of a resumption of stabilization in terms of pricing in several areas, but also in terms of just what we're seeing in terms of the demand, the pent-up demand. Our recent BTI, for example, we surveyed not just business travelers, but also CFOs and the perspective of CFOs around the world and what their expectations are for at least their company. And we're based on just the host of models that the inputs that we put in our model. This is where we're coming up with full recovery to the 2019 levels by 2025. So I wish I had a better answer for you. But I think it's just a different model and statistics. But that's where we're at, and that's one reason why we do this every year as well. I mean, in our BTI. I hope everyone will have a chance to look at it. There's actually a section like, well, how did we do? How did we do compared to our last BTI, and sort of an assessment of that. Were we off the mark in some areas, in other areas, or some areas compared to others? So I think that there's certainly, that's why we do this regularly. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. And so we've received thank goodness for Google. So 34.81 billion metric tons of CO2 related to airline travel in 2020. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Carlos.
Ben, do you have any other questions for Chris before we finish up?
Maybe a quick one, just for a verification, if I read the data and your message correct, when you refer to the recovery poll, and basically the government restrictions were mentioned as number one for Europe as preventing a faster return. So how much is the return to travel from Europe related to the government policies compared to like North America, which is a large domestic market? So what are the correlations between border opening, less restrictions, and a chance for recovery compared to like a large domestic market like North America or US?
Sure. I think there is a direct correlation in terms of the opening up economies, borders, and the resumption of business travel. So if we're going to look at like recovery, you know, US versus, which was a large market, but also the market for Europe, you know, I think that certainly uncertainty dampens recovery. I think there's still some uncertainty, particularly in Europe, but also in the United States and other countries around what's coming down the pike, what policies will be revised. You know, Western Europe business travel, it lagged in 2021. It's picking up steam, and I would argue partially and in large part due to some loosening of travel restrictions and also vaccination rates and pent-up demand. So I think that those are I think we found that business travelers in both regions, you know, there certainly was pent-up demand to resumption of business travel, but I do think that there is a correlation, direct correlation between the ability to do so. I think that for many companies, international markets are critical for their success. Thinking back to, for example, the financial collapse of 2008 and 2009, where we saw that was the last pre-pandemic significant dip in business travel. And many businesses realized that to climb out of the hole that they were in, they had to find new markets and they had to find new customers. And that actually increased, particularly for a lot of companies, international business travel. And so I think that that's another sign and indication that government policies and border openings have a significant impact on business travel for companies across the globe.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. That was a really, really interesting presentation. And as you say, that report is available to all GBTA members on the hub. So you've got the global report, and certainly we'll make sure that the European cut of that is made available to members as well. So Ben, thank you so much for joining us for your first Europe Town Hall. It's great to have you on board as the chair of the European Advisory Board. So thank you for that. And yeah, one last message to everybody. We are going to be in Berlin on the 28th of February, the 2nd of March, and I really, really hope as many of you as possible can join us there. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day.